He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
There have been quite a lot of studies done on people who are, in their last few days, and you never hear the wish that the done will work. It's always, I wish I'd spent more time with Wisey, I wish I'd spent more time on me, I wish I'd spent more time with family. And time use is the big part of that. Like, how do I spend my time? And in the middle of it, when you're really just trying to keep going and you're trying to put food on the table, trying to make sure your family's happy, that time can go. What we're trying to do is develop a system that allows you to at least think about it.
Kia ora, nau mai hara mai ki te ao hurahanga, ko Clackan Cannon tēnei. Professor Scott Duncan wants to try help us plan and use our time better, so that we can have more good days.
You cannot have a good day every day of your life, unfortunately, as much as we would love to. Some days just don't work out that way. But the idea is to really get in the habit of trying to plan for good days rather than just assuming one will come along. If you can add up more good days than days that have just sort of taken the control out of your hands, then you'll end up building that well-being so that your feelings of life satisfaction, your senses, your feeling of purpose, all of a sudden will start to grow because you're accumulating these good days.
Something currently not recommended as an ingredient for a good day is hours and hours on social media. But some people who seem to be experiencing addiction do fall into that trap. Later, we'll speak to one young researcher who's used EEG to develop hypotheses around how social media addiction might lead to changes in the brain.
Because my generation has had a decade of sitting here scrolling, creating these predictions about what the next video will be. That prediction tool has become blunted.
But first, back to Scott, who's a professor of population health at Auckland University of Technology, based at the Millennium campus on Auckland's North Shore. Recently, he's been investigating well-being and ways to improve it at both a community and individual level. And a big part of that, a key focus for Scott, is physical activity, which is fitting for where we are. As well as housing researchers, the AUT Millennium Building has a pool and a sports and fitness centre. Plus, it sits next to the High Performance Sports New Zealand building and opposite the National Aquatic Centre. Scott's office has a view out over the athletics track, where one person is doing steady laps and a group of 4 are involved in some intense-looking sprint training.
Yes, we are surrounded by people who are both elite athletes but also community members who are trying to get active and fit. So it is a nice place to be. But physical activity is a great one because it's such a perfect medicine. It's so good for everything. Mental health, physical function, social connections, all these things can be benefited from by physical activity. So, and we're also living in a world where we are engineering physical activity out of our lives on a daily basis, where once upon a time, everyone was active because it was just the way we had to get around. It was our workplaces were pretty active. Nowadays, it's the opposite. So we have to really try to be active. We have to plan to be active. Otherwise, you'll find it just does not happen.
Which we know, right? We know this. But sometimes it's just so hard to slot it in. There are only 24 hours in a day.
When we talk to people about their time use, we can talk about what things might be given up in order to fit more physical activity into people's days. You could take it from multiple things. You could take it from sleep even, which is not probably a good thing. We want to keep sleep. But you could also take it from sitting down or traveling or like commuting, spending time watching TV. You could potentially take some time out of there. So it's more about managing time budgets. And often even just being reflective about a day is something that's quite a powerful technique because often people don't. And I'm in that boat as well. Often you get into the rhythm of just continuing on and almost surviving through life. And you don't actually think about what you're doing in the day. You just do the things you need to do to keep going. And so even taking the time to think about how you're planning out each day just gives you that mindfulness of, okay, well, maybe I do need to prioritize myself a little bit more in some of these days so that I can continue to maintain my health and my well-being.
Of course, while it is very important, physical activity is just one element of what makes a good day. For this research, Scott wants to know about overall well-being. And so he's used the 5 Ways to Wellbeing from the Mental Health Foundation as a guide. As well as be active, there's connect.
So connecting with other people.
Give.
Being altruistic to people. It could be something as simple as making someone a cup of tea without being asked.
Keep learning.
Trying to learn something new.
And take notice.
Taking the time to notice the small things in life, being mindful about the beauty of life, which often we don't do because we're so busy, we're so rushed. Taking into account those 5 things within your day can lead to a feeling of accomplishment at the end of it, that actually, I've had a really good day today, I've given something, I've taken notice, I've been a bit active, and you just feel proud of yourself that actually you've accomplished something positive for yourself in that day.
Now, each person's Goldilocks day won't be the same. And depending on what that person does, there'll be distinct time use challenges. Someone working solo in a physically active role will fill their spare time differently to someone who's in a busy office, in meetings, or sat at a computer for 8 hours a day. And it will differ by age too.
For an older adult to a teenage boy, for example, they have very different ways that they would look at a good day. And I think it's really important to allow people to individualise that, which is some of the issues that you have with population guidelines that come out around physical activity or nutrition or whatever it might be. They tend to be one size fits all and they don't always fit everyone. So the good thing about time use is when you're talking to people about their day, you're asking them about what they want to do, what they want to achieve. Maybe they want something around their mental health, or perhaps it's something to do with their physical fitness. And so the day that you might create would depend on what they want to see at the end of it. So some of the work we're doing here at AUT is finding ways and systems where we can gather that data at that level in order to individualise the feedback that goes back to participants who are taking part in our work. That way it becomes, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, it becomes a customised, individualised approach.
They're currently running a pilot study with 50 participants. And to get into the nitty-gritty of all the different aspects of each person's day, they asked them to wear a sensor, as research fellow Dr. Anantha Narayanan explains.
These are research-grade activity monitors, like wearable sensors that you clip onto your thigh using a foam, a patch. They're quite non-intrusive. You would forget that you're wearing them after a day.
Right, so it's kind of a little plastic, like a small thumb shaped. I mean, is it 5 or 6 centimeters in length?
Yeah, like half your thumb. So it's really small, and it collects data that gets transferred to your mobile, like there's an app that collects the data, and it gets transferred to a cloud system where researchers can download the data.
So what does the sensor itself actually measure?
So the sensor measures acceleration, like raw acceleration in 3 axes, X, Y, Z. So it's just movement, and the algorithm uses those signals and classifies different behaviors such as sitting, standing, walking, running, cycling, sleep as well, based on their proprietary algorithms.
Gotcha. So somewhere in Denmark, somebody has been wearing these sensors and then running and cycling and swimming, and then worked out an algorithm that allows the sensor to spit back the information to you.
Pretty much, yeah.
They also get the raw data because, as Scott and Anantha explain, the sensor and algorithm isn't great at accurately identifying everything. For example, resistance training in the gym. Squatting with dumbbells might look like low-intensity sit-to-stand exercises to the sensors. But it's a heck of a lot of data, because the people are wearing them for a full 7 days, and the sensors take reading every 5 seconds.
So we could basically look at the number of transitions from a sit to stand, like how many times you stood up during the day, and how that affects your health and other health outcomes. We could look into that level of detail from this data.
So what other information do you collect from participants? Like, is it important for you to also know what their occupation is, for example?
Correct. Yeah, I think those are part of the demographic questionnaire, like the survey that we kind of go through. But well-being is one of our main outcomes, like life satisfaction, like evaluative well-being, like how they feel about their life in general.
And because well-being is the focus, while the participant is wearing the sensor, they also get a prompt 3 times a day from an app on their phone, asking them to fill in a momentary well-being survey. On a sliding scale, the person is asked to rank how happy, respected, energized, stressed, and lonely they're feeling, as well as what they're doing in that moment and who they're doing it with.
So you could look at how people are feeling during the day, and the value comes in when you overlap this data with the time use data that we collect from the sense. So we look at how people move and how that affects their well-being.
Back in his office, Scott shows me how the data looks when they put it together and annotate it for the different activities.
This is the sleep you can see on the blue here. So you can see how people's sleep patterns are changing as well. So this person had was a weekend, so they had a really rough sleep period here.
Right,
but
so you've got kind of laid out per day,
Yes.
and the sleep is highlighted in blue, and there's a big chunk on most days, but yeah, as you've pointed out,
But
Saturday.
even this person varies when they wake up. Those sort of micro variations is also not ideal. Obviously with the sleep patterns, having sleep patterns as regular as possible is ideal. But you can also, within this, map out for each person the amount of light physical activity they're doing, the amount of time they're sedentary, and when they get these bouts of vigorous activity, which, as you can see here, aren't that often. There's some periods of moderate activity that this person's had, none on the weekends, and it's all at the same time of day. So it's around about sort of the evening. So they're probably going to a gym or something like that. But what we'd like to see more ideally is probably have those a little bit more peppered out throughout the day. If you can avoid long stretches of sitting, it's better for you. So this really helps us also to be able to individualise feedback for people. If they are doing similar patterns where there's a chunk of time where they're often sitting, those are the times we know we can target on to try and suggest that they maybe break up that sitting using even just standing up, if nothing else, but potentially walking around a little bit more just to get a bit of blood into their legs.
When Scott mentions feedback here, that's because that's ultimately where they'd like to get to. Something tailored to your individual data that would send you a prompt reminding you not to get stuck in a time use rut.
The idea would be to give you just enough information, not too much, just to keep reflecting on what you're doing in the day and making sure that you're continuing to plan out those days so that you have more good days than bad days.
So the small pilot study is just the first step to collect training data. This data will be used to develop an AI intervention model that looks at the correlation between the well-being scores and how the person is using their time, and then sends time use prompts with the aim of improving that person's well-being score. From there, the next step is more participants, 500 people. They'll use the model and train it further on this group to feed back information that's personalised to them. So, a lot of work to do yet. But I asked Scott, if the bigger study goes well, what might we get out of this?
In an ideal world, I have to be careful because I have to be objective. It may not work, but if it does work, I think an approach like this could be really useful to be picked up at a national scale by whatever government agency feels that it's useful to them. But I think it would be really useful to see that, to prove, I guess, that this type of framework is actually a really efficient way of accessing a lot of people. And people love individualized information, right? They don't necessarily like the one-size-fits-all messages. So if you can show that actually these sort of systems give people what they need, not only what they need to hear, but when they need to hear it to improve their lives, then I think it can only be a good investment.
Scott is also currently working on another project that's separate but related. It's got to do with how our communities are designed and laid out, which, if you think about it, plays a big part in how we use our time. How long is your commute to work? Can you cycle or walk to the shops, or do you need to drive? Are there green spaces nearby you can exercise in? In particular, Scott has been doing some research around 4 areas in Tamaki Makaurau that are undergoing major urban redevelopment: Waikowhai, Oranga, Wesley and Aurere.
Essentially taking a lot of the older houses, the older state houses, and moving them down for medium density housing. And with that, building, hopefully, more shared neighbourhood spaces, greenways, more connections, things that are required for people to be out and about in their neighbourhood, feeling safe, feeling like they have a place to be active. And so it was really interesting to us to see these major changes in, I guess, essentially how we live our lives. How does that impact people's well-being? How does it impact where they go in a day? Does it mean that they tend to drive more, or does it mean they tend to walk more? Do they still connect with their neighbours, or do they feel more isolated? So all these things are really important to us as we're undergoing these major billion-dollar developments. And so part of our work is to follow people across the course of 3 years at least, and hopefully longer, to see if it is impacting on people's well-being. And so all the tools we've developed in terms of the accelerometry, the GPS, the smartphones, all that stuff we can put together and overlay on top of each other so we can have a really good picture of how people are living their lives.
They've got 2 years of data on this, which they're analysing right now. He brings up a video on the computer to show me. This one is GPS tracking of kids in a neighbourhood.
You can see they all start at home, and you can see as we run through the course of the day, so as the video is running, the day's passing, they've all come into school. And you can see the different dots of the different levels of activity. So sometimes they're physically active, and you'll see lots of bright spots around sort of the recess times, and then the rest of the time they're sitting. And eventually they'll filter back as they do at the end of the day. Some of them have walked, some of them have been driven, and they've found their way back home. But as you can see, when you put all this stuff over and you look at it over time, you get some really rich data how communities are engaging with their neighbourhoods and what streets they're taking and if they're walking or if they're driving and how active they are along the way. So it just gives us a rich amount of data to be able to feed back to people who are doing these developments and doing these urban designs. But of course, these are kids. With adults, they tend to go a lot further, so they go all over Auckland, they work all over the place. So we really use the whole Auckland map as our map. But with adults, we're really also interested in how much time they spend commuting and how much time they spend sitting. We really would love to see environments where it's much easier to be active, that you don't have to spend 3 hours a day in a car.
I think we would all like that. And it comes back to urban planning, says Scott, with one idea being the 20-minute neighbourhood.
20 minutes from any house, you can get anything you need in a day, where everything's walkable. There's shops, there's supermarkets, there's houses, of course, but there might be other things you can do, parks, and it's much easier to get to your workplace as well with really good public transport infrastructure. So those sorts of environments, we know from overseas research, when they do exist, people tend to be a lot happier and tend to be a lot more connected socially.
In the meantime, it would help to just keep checking in on how we use our time, says Scott. Not every day can be a perfect day. And there are times in our lives when days are just full of responsibilities, and it's really hard to carve out any time for yourself. If you've got young kids, for example, or are caring for a family member.
Some days are just not going to happen. It's just not going to work. But if you can start thinking about it more, then hopefully there'll be these better days, these days where you've done all the things you wanted to do, they'll start becoming more frequent, and that will just accumulate until, when the time you've finally reached the end of your life, you'll feel like you're satisfied with that you've taken the time you've been given.
Thanks to Professor Scott Duncan and Dr. Anantha Narayanan of the School of Sport and Recreation at Auckland University of Technology. Now, some of us might be able to grab a few hours back from the time sink that is the various social media platforms. As a 2024 University of Canterbury study of almost 400 social media users found out.
We spend more time scrolling on social media than we do eating and exercising a day, according to a new study. Everyone surveyed spent more than 2 hours a day on the platforms, and the study participants showed signs of addiction, with people subconsciously drawn to using social media.
It was these signs of addiction that neuroscience undergraduate student Tom Bolus recognised in himself.
I've set all these things up. I've tried these app timers that, you spend 15 minutes on TikTok. That's enough time for the day. But my brain always finds a way around it.
Tom is in his early 20s. So the generation that grew up with smartphones and social media available at a very early age. Something that might change in the future.
In a world first, Australia will in December introduce a social media ban for under 16s.
Our message is really simple. We have restrictions on our kids in the physical world. We need restrictions in the virtual world.
But Tom grew up with it. So for his honours project, the question he wanted to investigate is, what is social media addiction's impact on our brains and mental health? Which is a massive question, much bigger than can be answered in an honours project. So to be clear, what Tom and I are talking about is a real small study he has done. But it's allowed him to get some clues and develop hypotheses about what might be happening. He used a self-reported questionnaire to identify two groups, one that was low risk for social media addiction and another that was high risk. He had a total of 20 participants, so 15 in the low risk group and 5 in the high risk. Then they all answered 60 widely used questions around mood disorders: anxiety, depression, stress, intolerance to uncertainty, and loneliness. And then he investigated whether there were differences in the brain's electrical activity between the two groups.
We put an EEG on people's heads, electroencephalography. It is a little, kind of like a swimming cap with electrodes in it. There was 56 electrodes that I connected up. The way it works is your brain talks to itself by sending these electrical impulses. Think of like the wiring inside your house. And these electrodes implanted in the swimming cap, they can pick up the electrical signals that are happening in the brains. And so we sat them in a pretty comfy chair for about 10 minutes, turned the lights off, made sure there was no noise around, and just recorded what their brain was doing at rest, without falling asleep, but at rest with their eyes closed.
What Tom looked at was whether there were differences in the resting brain activity and functional brain connectivity between these two groups. Brain activity means whether the EEG was recording some electrical signals. And then connectivity is about how different parts of the brain are interacting or working together. It's really easy to get into the weeds here, because with all the electrodes, the EEG is recording in 6 different frequencies of electrical brainwaves at 20 or so different parts of the brain. So Tom has results that sound like
between the pregenial anterior cingulate cortex and the right precentral gyrus, and we found that there was reduced connectivity between these two regions in the addicted group in the beta band.
Which is gobbledygook for anyone without a neuroscience degree. But he did see some differences in brainwave activity and connectivity at certain frequencies for a number of regions. What Tom did then was investigate what these changes might mean at a brain function level.
As much of a student and research academic kind of person that I feel myself to be, I also feel I'm in the perfect position to talk about this kind of a thing, because in going through these results, I reflected on, okay, that's what that does. That's what this means for the person. I have that. I feel like I'm addicted to my phone in one way or another, and it was very interesting for me to go through this and reflect on myself, my own behaviors, how my own brain works.
Again, this is a small study with resting state EEG comparing high and low risk social media addiction groups. But the results are a starting point. So with his supervisors, Tom made a model about what might be happening. In this model, there are kind of 3 main hypotheses. First is that extensive social media use leads to a blunting of the experience of the world.
And so what that means is that they'll go out and seek stimulation constantly to feel something. It is analogous to what is found in depression, known as anhedonia, where they just feel blunt. They don't feel anything.
The second is that people get stuck in their behaviors.
When you're doing something, your brain might say, like a little voice in the back of your head might be like, hey man, maybe you should go and do something else. If you're on your phone, you'll be like, oh, I've got to go to work soon, maybe I should go jump through the shower. If I'm on my phone and I'm in the library, oh, you should get off your phone and you should study. That little voice is in everyone's head. But in the addicted brain, it doesn't talk to the part of your brain that is like, okay, let's act on that as well as it should. Can't recruit executive control is the fancy way to put it. You can't act on it as well. And so you keep thinking about things. You're stuck ruminating where you should be acting. But it's also in behaviors, as I said, if you're on your phone scrolling and you're like, maybe I should go and do something else. Your brain's like, I like stimulation better. It's easy. I'm already here. Let's just keep doing this instead of doing what I probably should be doing.
And the third hypothesis is that social media addiction might break the ability of your brain to act as a confident prediction machine. Here's how the theory goes. Your brain works as a kind of probability machine, constantly assessing.
It's kind of like, okay, have I done this behavior before? Was it good or bad for me? And if you do the behavior again and it is good to you, you can go back to this kind of algorithm in your head and be like, okay, the next time I do this behavior, it'll probably be good for me. That's the normal thing. That's how we've evolved, that's how we've adapted, that's how life has been normally. But now we have this software that puts things randomly in front of you. Every time you engage your thumb to scroll, your brain creates a prediction about what the next video will be. And because my generation has had a decade of sitting here scrolling, creating these predictions about what the next video will be, that prediction tool has become blunted. The other thing, which is another button that gets pressed here, is that every time your brain creates a prediction and it's not right, it engages parts of your brain to put more engagement, more attention, more effort into making the next prediction more reliable. So you'll sit there for a while on your scroll, and then eventually you'll find a good video and it'll be incredibly stimulating because your brain's put so much effort into finding it.
Tom and his supervisors have since increased the study to 50 people. They're currently analysing those results. And instead of just looking at two groups, high risk versus low risk, they'll instead investigate EEG differences across the spectrum of high to low risk. Tom's original plan was to go on to study to become a doctor, but this research project has changed that.
What's next for me is a PhD. Gonna continue on in this space. I can't, in my head, justify moving on straight into medicine after finding all these things. I feel like I've got to do more work, figure something out, maybe a way that my generation can help us help ourselves. And so whether it's cognitive training, but even everyday things like following a recipe or, going and talking to someone, putting effort in, seeing what it does for you is going to be huge for you to find your footing back in the world that's outside of your phone.
Thanks to Tom Bolus, neuroscience student at the University of Otago. This episode was produced by me, Claire Kincannon, and sound engineering was by William Saunders. Script editing was by Miranda Fisher. Tēnā koe I whakarongo mai. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Claire Kincannon. Have a great week. Spend your time wisely. Kia pai, te wiki.